In watershed hydrology, we are generally interested in understanding how water starts in the atmosphere, moves through the system, and ends up in our rivers. We are particularly interested in how natural or human-induced change alters the hydrologic cycle. So in a mountainous environment like this, we're standing in the snowy range in southeastern Wyoming. Obviously, this is a snow-dominated landscape right now, but in the summertime, all of this snow will have transformed itself into water, which is then feeding our lakes and rivers downstream. The story of moisture and snow and even runoff in Wyoming is the story of variability. So one of the great problems with studying hydrology and answering the question about whether we have more moisture this year or over the last couple of years is that there is enormous variability in the historical record. Over the last 10 or 20 years, snowpack changes on an interannual nature by an enormous amount. And so what you really need is a long enough record to look for those changes, because a couple of years of high snow doesn't really answer the question, because the next couple of years the snow might be a lot lower. So this particular watershed we've been studying for about 11 years. And we started here back 11 years ago because it has regional significance. This snow ends up going into the Little Laramie River and into the Big Laramie River, which supplies the North Platte and has significant water contributions to downstream agriculture and people. It is also particularly interesting because back in the 1970s and 80s, scientists studied these sites for a long time. They had a continuous record. And so while we have a little bit of a scientific gap, what we now have is 11 years of record that's modern, that ties into a longer historical record. And that really helps us put our modern hydrology into context with what was happening back in decades prior. So in this particular landscape where we're standing now, we've experienced logging over the last 100 years. We've experienced recreation and fire, and recently a large-scale beetle epidemic that has altered the structure of the forest. By having our observation platforms in a place where there were previous historical records, it allows us to do some comparative analysis between now and in the past and make some connections about how landscape management or changing forest types really affect the hydrological systems. Every year we're out here, we ask more questions because what you think you saw last year is upended the following year. And it seems like such a simple problem that you could come up here, monitor the snowpack, and be able to predict how much water you're going to get. And as it happens, it is devilishly challenging. We still do not have a good scientific understanding of how that individual snowflake is going to melt or sublimate or work its way into the soil moisture or end up in a river versus that snowflake. And so our process understanding still has a long way to go. Up here in these high mountains, what we generally think is happening is water's moving into the soil, some of it is going into the fractured bedrock, and then moving fairly rapidly into our local streams. But some proportion of this water is moving into a larger regional groundwater and then is showing up much farther downstream. And we're trying to get a handle on how long that takes, how much water really is proportioned into each of those sections of the regional soil, the regional groundwater, and then the deep groundwater. What we rely on is the full integration of ecology and hydrology and groundwater observation, geophysics. We put them all together. We use our meteorological observations to provide our inputs. And through the use of sophisticated models, we gain a better understanding of how it's all connected. And then as we gain more and more and more knowledge, we can have a better estimate and we can build better models of how the moisture is distributed across the landscape. And that takes time, and that's really the heart of a lot of what our research is all about. How we can go from essentially point observations to broader understanding of what's going on across the landscape. As temperatures change across the West, and as we see changing patterns in rainfall and snowfall emerge over the next couple of decades, we will inevitably see changes in the amount and timing and quality of water in our rivers and lakes and streams and aquifers. And from a scientific perspective, getting an understanding of how changing environment is going to change hydrology is absolutely vital. In Wyoming, we rely heavily on clean and abundant water supplies. We do not have a shortage of water in Wyoming, but we do have the potential for changes to occur in the timing of water, of how early the snow is going to melt, and how much water is going to be present in our lakes and streams later in the season, which would affect the availability of water for irrigation or the availability of water for ecological flows. Anything that changes the amount of water in the system or the timing of how it melts and moves into our streams and moves downriver has the potential to affect these millions of downstream users. So in the end, as scientists and as hydrologists, what we really want to be able to say is how much of this snowpack is going to end up not only in the soil moisture, but in the local stream and then in the river downstream. As a headwater state, this snowpack is going to end up in the tap water of people in Nebraska, and it's going to end up all the way down in the Gulf of Mexico. And so understanding how this snowpack ends up working its way all the way down may not really be a reasonable goal, but it's a heck of a challenge, and it's a heck of a scientific task that we could put in front of ourselves. And if we set the goal towards a full understanding of these processes, we're going to gain great insight into all of the sort of mechanisms and controls that really lead to a better understanding of our natural world.